is there actually a simple or straightforward answer to this question?
No, I don't think so.
With me today, I have Seb Patel, COO at Franc, and our go-to man for all tough financial questions.
Seb Patel on the line, the COO and co-founder of Franc.
Noticed a lot of grey in this beard this morning, so hopefully I got some wisdom to impart.
And this topic is a tough one. Should you buy or should you rent?
I think it's a horses for courses type scenario. Some people, it's better for them to rent. Some people, it's more appropriate to buy. So I guess it's all about where you actually want to stay.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Frankly Speaking, where we tackle topics around investing and managing your money with a no jargon approach. My name is Cassidy Nydahl. I'm head of growth at Franc, an app that's making investing simple and accessible to everyone. If you want to learn more, see the description below. And if you like what you see or hear, give us a like, leave us a comment, and subscribe for future episodes. With me today, I have Seb Patel, COO at Franc, and our go-to man for all tough financial questions in the office and in these Frankly Speaking episodes. And this topic is a tough one. Should you buy or should you rent? We're going to look at the pros and cons of renting and buying. We're going to look and unpack the costs for both options. And then we're going to end with 3 questions you should ask yourself before you make your decision. So wait around for that one. Hey, Seb.
Hey, how's it, Cass?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Thank you for joining us again so soon as well. We obviously like you in the studio.
No worries. Noticed a lot of grey in this beard this morning, so hopefully I got some wisdom to impart.
You can compare from video to video, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Shall we tackle the topic head on by, is there actually a simple or straightforward answer to this question?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a horses for courses type scenario. Some people, it's better for them to rent. Some people, it's more appropriate to buy. So I guess it's all about where you actually want to stay, what your financial position and situation is, what your work situation is. There's a lot of factors to take into account.
Completely. So just for context for our viewers as well, I'm currently going through this question myself where our rental is coming to an end and we need to decide, are we renting, are we buying? And it's been one of the toughest questions to make, I guess. And you have owned a property for over 17 years now.
Yeah, it's actually just, I think this month is 18. So, yeah, my bond, they're going to close it quite soon. But
nice.
So like 2 years into working, luckily I was earning enough to buy a property near Sandton. So I was still living in the same place. And it's been an okay investment decision, not amazing. I think I missed a bit of the property run that happened sort of in the early 2000s. But yeah, I guess that's life.
Yeah, that's what you learn, I guess, on this journey. Cool. So I guess to help our viewers to make that decision for themselves, let's maybe start with the pros and cons of both renting and buying. So starting with renting, the first pro is obviously having that flexibility, right? You can decide on a whim, I don't want to live here anymore. I can move, maybe give 1 month, 2 months notice at a push, right?
Yeah, sure. So like you can decide to live in one suburb this year, another suburb next year, and like see the town or see the city that you're living in. Whereas, yeah, if you buy it, that sort of flexibility is not there. Yeah,
and of course for a like a young professional or a student even, or someone who's kind of just moved to a city, that's probably a nice way to also explore your suburbs. Kind of figure out what kind of lifestyle you want and how you want to live, right?
Sure. And it's also like you can pick somewhere that's close to work, maybe close to your friends, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Completely. On the flip side of that, there's obviously also the non-flexibility when your landlord says, okay, actually, I'm selling a house or I, don't want you as a tenant for whatever reason. And then you have to make a plan fast.
Yeah, or if the landlord says, okay, the rent's going up 50% or something like that, which is also something that can happen. I know landlords generally, if you're a good tenant, they'll try and make a plan for you and not like up the rental too much. But it is another risk.
Yeah, totally. So that brings us to, I guess, another pro and a con. The pro obviously being that with a rental cost, and a wise man said to me, your rental cost is the highest you're ever going to pay every month, right? Whereas with a mortgage, it's the lowest you're ever going to pay every month. But that might change quite quickly if your landlord decides to hike it up.
Yeah, 100%. You're not in control of your destiny. Yeah.
Completely. Having said that, there's often contracts in place that fix that cost for at least a year or depending on what your contract is. most of the time.
I mean, sometimes there'll be a fixed increase, but yeah, it's all dependent on whether you can get it extended in the first place.
When talking about cost, there's obviously less costs and also less insurance. So you have your rental every month, and then you might have home contents insurance if you obviously have your own furniture. Anything that I'm missing there in terms of rental costs?
No, I mean, it depends on like your contract with your landlord, like who's picking up the water, who's picking up the electricity. Sometimes it might be, pay as you go electricity, which is an extra kind of cost. But yeah, the one good thing also is the fact that if something goes wrong, you call the landlord and say, hey, come, please fix it. It's not your responsibility. Burst geyser or something like that, which can be, a lot of money.
Yeah. And it's very nice having someone else fix that for you, actually. And then I think the last con that we probably need to chat about is, where your money is going, right? When you put it into a rental, yes, you're living in a place, and that's obviously important. You need to live somewhere and have a roof over your head, but you're not investing that money. It's not going into an asset. You're not going to get it back.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pure cost. It's a pure expense, right?
Yeah.
It's a living cost. You need to live. Maslow's hierarchy and all that. So it's something that you have to do. But like you say, it's a pure expense.
But if your rental is relatively low and you've got a good deal and you have extra money, you could put that into another kind of investment that could give you really great returns.
Sure. Yeah. If you do have excess, it all depends on like if you're living in a place that's affordable versus if you're living a lifestyle in a place that's costing you a lot. But that's definitely an opportunity. Yeah.
And one of the biggest factors at the moment making the decision right now, renting or buying, is the fact that I live in Cape Town, and Cape Town rental is extortionary. Like, it's really, really high. I think Joburg probably less so.
Yeah, I think it's a supply and demand issue. I mean, Cape Town with the mountain and the ocean is limited.
It's a nice place to live.
But also it's limited. Like you can't live in the ocean, right? So whereas in Joburg, like the sprawl is a lot bigger. So a lot more optionality in terms of where you can live. But yeah, I mean, rental is higher, but I mean, property prices are even higher, I think. So that's another thing to take into account.
Pick your evil, essentially. Okay, so pros and cons of buying then, right? So first pro, I guess, is the fact that you are investing your money in an asset. Or are you? Keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely investing money into an asset that over time historically has shown, good growth potential. It's also like goes in line with interest rates sometimes because, the higher the interest rate, more people can't afford and then they try to sell. It depends on foreign money coming into the market, like with what's happening in Cape Town, pushing the prices up. It's like, where are you in an area near schools, which also pushes the prices up. So yeah, a lot of factors to take into account. The one good thing about buying a property, though, is that generally the banks will lend you money to buy a property. So you get the effect of gearing, which can be positive, because if you don't have R1 million or 2 million rand to buy a property, banks will fund, let's say 90% or 80% of it. Yeah. Whereas if you're trying to buy shares or ETFs, the banks are not going to lend you money, So it's a different kind of asset, which is a bit more stable. But yeah, it kind of goes up and down, but not as volatile as, like, let's say, the stock market maybe.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And to that point, also, one of the pros is obviously improving your credit score, right? If you keep to your monthly payments and you're good at repaying your mortgage, you're essentially building up your credit score. And that's great for future if you ever need credit.
Yeah, I mean, so building up or even creating credit score, a lot of people, first-time owners, may not have had a credit card or may not have much of a store history. So maybe it's difficult for them to get that loan in the first place. But yeah, if you continue to make your payments, it will help.
Yeah. And then obviously greater freedom to make the house a home or apartment if you buy an apartment, which for some people is really important, right?
Yeah. And also the opportunity to maybe, if you're not entirely happy, to renovate or refurb and that kind of stuff, where if you're renting, that's less of an option. Yeah.
On the flip side, from a con perspective, I guess when you buy a house, you're buying a solid, stationary object. You can't move it. So location-wise, there's way less flexibility if you were to move because of work, for example, or if you decide this is actually not the lifestyle I want to live, I want to live closer to the beach or have a bigger space. If we maybe have an addition to the family, less flexibility there.
Yeah, I mean, you can always move, but there are a lot of costs involved in either buying or selling, because yeah, I mean, when you buy a property, there's transfer taxes, there's attorney's fees, all that kind of stuff, which a lot of people don't take into account. So it's not that easy to go in and out. Even when you sell, if you use an agent, you need to pay them. So yeah, buying and selling, there's costs which you need to take into account when you're buying and selling.
Yeah, which brings us to the one con, well, one of many cons, I guess, is that the price you see is not the price you pay.
No. I mean, yeah, it's probably like another 10% that you need to add on. Plus all the responsibilities that, I guess was a pro of renting. Then you need to start paying levies, electricity, lights, water,
fixing your visa.
Yeah, all of that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's also sometimes a risky investment, right? So yes, you're putting money into an asset and essentially an investment, but there's no guarantee that that's going to pay off in the end.
No, I mean, it's a more stable investment than most, but I mean, we can see what happened in the US in 2008, the housing market where banks were just lending to anyone and everyone. And then that was pushing the prices up. And all of a sudden the housing market collapsed and everyone was left with no money. And like there was a whole financial disaster. So it's stable generally, but I mean, there is the risk of property prices falling.
Cool. So let's go into the costs of renting versus buying, right? Maybe starting with rental, because that's pretty straightforward. You have your monthly rental. As you mentioned before, you might have, pay-as-you-go electricity. You might pay for your water. Oftentimes that's covered. And then maybe you might have home contents insurance. Anything I'm missing on rental?
No, I think that's about it.
But then let's go into buying, very quickly discovering all the hidden costs that they don't tell you about. Should we maybe unpack some of them? So obviously you have your mortgage and interest on the money that you're essentially borrowing from the banks, right? Which may go up or down depending on the economy, right? And that's where a lot of homeowners, especially recently, have been caught out. What they thought that they could afford on month-to-month basis has gone up quite considerably, and they can't necessarily afford it anymore.
Yeah, I think like your monthly payments probably gone up about 30-40% if you bought like when prime was at its lowest compared to where it is now.
Yeah.
So I mean that's a big change in affordability. So that's why banks, they should be doing some sort of like stress test or scenario analysis when you apply for a loan to see, okay, you can afford, let's say, 10,000 rand a month now, but if interest rates go up, can you afford 14? And a lot of people can't because that's quite a big difference. So I mean, another point, if you can afford to pay a lot more than your like if your minimum is, let's say, 10,000 rand, but you can actually afford to pay 15, then you should do that, because not only it allows you to pay off your loan a lot faster when interest rates are low, but then also if interest rates do increase, then at least you know that you can afford to pay that increased amount. So yeah, when you do the maths, like, if you're buying a property for R1 million and you pay off your monthly installment over the 20-year period, you're actually paying a lot of interest.
Scary.
Yeah, I mean, it's a multiple of the actual cost of the house. So yeah, if you can afford to pay more, that can really accelerate your repayment.
Luckily, a lot of these property sites like Property 24, for example, have calculators that show you over time what you're going to spend and kind of what your monthly repayments are going to be, and kind of top end, bottom end of that. So definitely worth doing your due diligence and making sure you can afford it, both the top and the bottom end. Then taxes, and sometimes if you bought an apartment, levies, and that one really, I think, gets you. What we've realized, kind of looking at both houses and apartments, is that your levies increase on a year-to-year basis, but then there's also sometimes spot levies where the building might want to do some renovations and you don't have a choice. You have to pay into that.
Yeah, I mean that can hurt quite a bit. Like if the body corporate wants to build up a reserve or something like that. Yeah, there's always increase in levies. I mean that the increase in levies is an annual thing, but yeah, like you say, all of a sudden they want another few thousand rand, to paint the walls or something like that, or just to build up the reserves. Yeah, that can sting.
Yeah. So again, make sure you have some wiggle room for when that happens, right? And then we touched on it just now, but maintenance, right? Burst geyser, you have to fix your roof because it's leaking. There's damp in the floor. you need to make sure that you can cover that cost, which is where an emergency fund is obviously really, really important.
Sure. And it can also help you for that spot levies as well, right? Yeah.
Yes. So generally, if you're buying a house, an emergency fund is really important. I don't know if you have any tips or thoughts around how much that emergency fund should be.
I mean, generally, the guidance is 3 to 6 months of your like monthly income. I think that's a good place to start. It can cover these types of emergencies, also flat tire, whatever.
Yeah. Cool. So shall we go into the 3 questions to ask yourself before you make that decision? And this really, we've always spoken about the variability of renting and buying, right? There's pros and cons for both. It really depends on your situation. And these 3 questions will help you to figure out what that situation is so that you can answer that question for yourself, right? So the first question was, how long do you plan to live in the place that you're staying? And this is obviously really important because if you're buying, for example, it should probably be a 5, maybe 8-year investment. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
18 in my scenario, but yeah. If you're not sure if this is the place you want to stay in, then renting is probably best because, like I said, there's transaction costs going in, there's transaction costs going out. So if you're going to be, buying and selling every 2 years, it doesn't make sense because you're soon going to be out of pocket quite quickly. So yeah, if you're not sure, like if you have a job that might take you to another city quite soon, then yeah, it makes a lot more sense to rent versus buy.
Yeah. And very similar to long-term investments, right, where there's fluctuations. For example, when we've been looking at houses, interestingly, a lot of the houses we've been looking at, the families have only had it for 2 to 3 years because they've had like another child, for example, and they need more space. So they've had to move and they're actually selling at less than they bought. And that's not even factoring in the transfer costs and the attorney's costs and all of those. So it just goes to show you really need to make sure that you're giving it a long time so that if the market dips, which it did in these last few years, you're catering for that. You're making sure that you're mitigating that risk.
Sure. And another cost that we haven't mentioned, but it's mainly if you're kind of like the high end of the market. If you sell your primary residence for more than 2.5 million rand, then you start paying capital gains tax also. So SARS also catches you.
Oh, wow. So many costs that we're uncovering. And then, of course, if you were to move because of work, if work sends you overseas, for example, or a different city or even a different area, and it takes you 2 hours to get to work as opposed to 1 hour, that's also something to keep in mind. So, are you going to stick around for quite a while, or do you work remotely and it doesn't really matter? Is everything, all the things that you need to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah.
The second question is, what's your financial situation? And we've really touched on this quite a lot, right? The price of buying or your kind of monthly repayments on a bought house or apartment can fluctuate quite drastically, and you need to cater for that.
Yeah. So you need to keep that in mind, but also like sometimes just renting makes more sense. I mean, like if you're renting a 2 million rand house, for example, like the monthly payment on that would be 20,000 plus like all the other costs, whereas maybe you can like rent it for 15,000. Then if you want to live there, then renting makes more sense.
Completely. To add to that, I mean, say for whatever reason you lose your job or your income doesn't come in as regularly. If you're renting, you might move in with your family, for example, and save a buck for a few months to kind of weather that time. When you're buying, you have to pay back every month.
Yeah.
You can't. Well, you can default, but it's not ideal.
Yeah, and your options are a bit more limited. I mean, if you creative, you can do a few things like maybe get a housemate or something like that to supplement the money that you're getting in. But you have a lot less optionality.
And of course, we've spoken about the importance of an emergency fund, right? So also going into a buying situation, you need to make sure that you've got an emergency fund before you probably even go into that buying situation so that you have that on hand in case.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, and then the third and last question is, what's the housing market like where you're planning on moving in? So obviously in Cape Town, for example, property or rental is really hard to come by, which means it's really expensive. So in our case, it's probably going to end up being more cost effective in the long run, at least to buy. I don't know what it's like in Joburg at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the market is quite tough. I think like your experience about families selling for lower than what they bought for. I think that's prevalent in Johannesburg as well, especially in the sort of mid to higher end of the market. I think you can still probably get, maybe decent deals as a seller in the lower end, but I think it's a tough market in general.
And then something to keep in mind, I guess, on a micro level, right, is the area that you're buying in going to, upgrade, or is it degrading? Is something happening around there that is going to bring more value to your property, to your area, or is it not on the upward trend, which is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, things like in Johannesburg, like when the Gautrain was being built, where the stations were going to be, that made the property prices of places near the station appreciate a bit, because it would be a lot easier for people to go around, and similar kind of thing. Like when you're choosing whether to buy or rent, you also need to take into account the costs of traveling to where you're working, right? Because it might be worth paying a bit more for a place that's closer to work versus having to commute an hour or two every day.
It makes so much sense.
Especially with petrol at 25 Rand. Yeah.
Yes, you've got to save where you can.
Yeah.
Cool, Seb. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. It was very enlightening. I hope everyone here also got some great tips and insights, and that we equipped you with the information and the questions that you need to make the decision for yourself. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's Frankly Speaking episode. As always, if you liked what you saw or heard, please give us a like, leave us a comment, and subscribe for future episodes. Cheers for now.